This video was brought to you by Skillshare. As you probably noticed, especially if you live here, the UK is struggling with a housing crisis. One of the main causes of these chronically unaffordable house prices is a lack of housing supply, and even the government itself admits that it's not building enough. Unfortunately for anyone who wants to buy a house, and for the UK more generally, successive Conservative governments have been unable to resolve this issue because Conservative backbenchers reliably oppose basically any plan that might mean more houses in their constituencies. Apparently undeterred by their predecessors' track record, however, on Monday, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Housing Minister Michael Gove announced their new plans to build more houses by increasing housing density in certain government-selected urban areas, with the first of these set to be Cambridge. So in this video, we'll take a look at these new plans. Why, to be fair to the government, it does make a lot of sense to focus on places like Cambridge, and whether Sunak will actually be able to get these plans past his own backbenchers. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a bit of context. As we've explained in numerous other videos, the UK has one of the world's worst housing crises. Historically, the ratio between the median house price and median income has sat at around 4, which means that the median house used to cost 4 times the median annual salary. Today, however, the average house costs 9 times the average salary in the UK, and over 12 times the average salary in London. Now, while there's some academic debate as to what's causing this crisis, most people, including the government, agree that the root cause of these high and rising prices is a chronic housing shortage. The government itself admits that the UK should ideally be building about 300,000 new houses every year, but the UK hasn't built more than 250,000 in a single year since 1997, and usually builds significantly less than 200,000. Now, the government obviously knows that it isn't even meeting its own targets here, but successive Conservative governments have been unable to do much about it because many Conservative backbenchers just don't like the idea of building more houses, largely because their home-owning constituents worry that more houses will mean lower house prices and more strain on public services. This is, for example, exactly what happened to Boris Johnson when he came into power in 2019. Johnson and his head honcho Dominic Cummings wanted to reform the UK's planning system to make house building easier, but Conservative backbenchers put up a massive fuss, and Johnson ultimately had to scrap his plans, despite the fact that he had a relatively comfortable 80-seat majority. Despite these setbacks, though, for the past few months, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, has been doing the media rounds insisting that Conservative MPs are wrong and that the government does need to build more houses. Then, on Monday afternoon, Gove announced his new plan to get things going, which was promptly endorsed by Number 10. According to Gove, the government wants to build a total of 1 million homes this Parliament, which would mean building something like 300,000 before the next election, as well as saying that the government plans to meet this target by increasing housing density in 20 pre-selected cities instead of building on the Greenbelt. Now, these new developments are going to be directed by the government's new super squad team of leading planning and other experts charged with working across the planning system to unblock major housing developments. In a way then, this new policy is sort of a mishmash of last year's Levelling Up white paper, where the government said it wanted to invest in those 20 cities across the UK to improve regional inequality, and the street vote system, which was previously endorsed by the Johnson government at the end of his tenure, which aims to achieve what planners describe as gentle density by encouraging locals who live on the same street to agree to street-wide development guidelines. Anyway, the first effort is set to be in Cambridge, where the government wants to build, quote, a new urban quarter. Now, we're not entirely sure what this is going to look like in reality, whether it's going to involve an entirely new neighbourhood in the city, or whether the government just wants to increase the housing density within existing neighbourhoods. But it's fundamentally a pretty good idea. Cambridge is an educational and entrepreneurial superpower, with one of the world's best universities and a thriving tech and sciences sector. But thanks to prohibitive planning restrictions, it just doesn't have enough houses. This means that many people are unable to move to the city, and as such, its economy just can't grow as fast as it should. And that also explains why houses in Cambridge are nearly as expensive as they are in London. It also makes life significantly more difficult for businesses, who often choose to base themselves in Cambridge in order to guarantee themselves access to its pool of graduates. For example, Cambridge and Oxford together average just 300,000 square feet of new laboratory space each year. And in Cambridge today, you have to wait almost a year for the next available lab space. And while 300,000 square feet might sound like a lot, consider the fact that, for context, Boston has 6 million square feet of lab space under development right now. Now, to be clear, this current policy isn't going to solve the UK's housing crisis or put a significant dent in house prices nationwide. Ultimately, increasing density for a couple of towns won't make that much difference on its own. Case in point is Manchester, which, despite developing its city centre significantly over the last decade, hasn't really grown that much because its suburbs are building so slowly. Nonetheless, these city centre density projects do make sense, and it also makes sense to build more houses in Cambridge. So in this respect, the government deserves credit. Unfortunately for Sunak, however, there's no guarantee he'll be able to get any of this through Parliament. In many ways, Sunak's plan should be pretty palatable to Conservative MPs. It preserves the Greenbelt, it doesn't require a wholesale reform to the planning system, which is what backbenchers got so stressed out about under Boris Johnson, and it will apparently be funded by a tax on developers, which is about the most politically uncontroversial source of funding that you could imagine. Nonetheless, Conservative MPs have already come out swinging against the plan. Anthony Brown, Conservative MP for South Cambridge, says that he'll do, quote, everything he can to stop the plans because apparently Cambridge doesn't have enough water. This is in some sense unsurprising. The Conservative Parliamentary Party have descended into infighting over the last few years. And if Johnson couldn't get his house building reforms through at the peak of his political powers, it was always a bit of a long shot for Sunak. For his part, though, Sunak has resisted these accusations, and a spokesperson for Number 10 has insisted that no one is doing mass house building in Cambridge, and that millions of pounds would also be spent on tackling water scarcity problems in the area. But it remains to be seen whether this will be enough to placate his backbenchers. And ultimately, as with everything in housing, we'll just have to wait and see whether anything new gets built. As always, things change and develop in stories like this, so keep paying attention for updates as they develop. In fact, that's probably not a bad idea more generally. Things are always changing, and it feels great to stay on top of them as they do. Even within TLDR, I've recently shifted my video editing workflow from Final Cut to Premiere in order to better integrate with the Adobe products our growing team of editors prefer. Now, when I started with YouTube, I just messed around and taught myself Final Cut. But this time round, at the advice of my team, I headed over to Skillshare to take their course on the topic. Unlike when I taught myself the first time round, I was guided through the process quickly and efficiently, and barely lost any productivity as I shifted from one tool to the other. It's not just that either. You likely already knew that Skillshare had classes for things like photography, editing, and illustration, but Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes too. Now, we all know at this stage that traditional jobs aren't one size fits all. I mean, I quit my full-time job in marketing so that I could take more control and do YouTube full-time. Now, that's not necessarily the path that you want to take too, but the courses on Skillshare can help you design a career that fits you. That's courses on everything from how to start a business, growing in e-commerce, how to maximize your workflow, or the course I'm taking right now on how to build a business that lasts. And if that sounds interesting, you should use our link in the description, which gives you access to all of that for free. That's right, the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So check it out, and thanks for supporting the channel.